So on a day like this, what moves you into action? On an ordinary day, what moves you into action? When we think about this, what moves us into action? Sometimes perhaps we're like the skydiver who was asked by his friend, what made you decide that for the very first time, what made you decide that you wanted to jump out of an airplane 1,000 feet in the air? And he said, well, a plane with 3 dead engines. What moves us to action? Now you're getting it. What moves us to action? What sometimes calls us to jump or to leap, to take that step before you feel ready? You ever been there? Of course you have. This past week, what moves us to action? Sometimes it is crisis. You have to jump, move before you're ready. Sometimes it's a need. Sometimes it's desire, passion. Or what about inspiration? Does that sometimes move you to action? Compassion, fear, anger, fury. That'll certainly move me to action. How about you? Personal pride. Somebody's counting on you. Habit, routine, quite often are what move us to action. And if I were to ask you what moves you to action, how many of you would say all of the above? Yeah, because at different times, different places, different ways, we're moved to action. We're motivated. We're set into motion. We go about our day because of some impetus, perhaps. But what if rather than simply being moved to action by whatever the circumstances of hand may bring up, what if a way of being was the biggest motivational force in our life? What if it was a way of being in the world? And then that no matter what would come up, whether it's crisis or opportunity or compassion or fear or fury, whatever it is, that is an opportunity to express a way of being. You see, I think that that's really the way we're created to engage life at its essence and at our essence, as a way of being. Because we are beings. We are multidimensional beings. We are more than meet the eye. We are both spirit and form. We are both finite and infinite. And so we're always bringing to life all that life is through us. And so life is about a way of being. I mean, consider this. If you look at any spiritual master, any guru, any teacher, any ascended one, whether it's Moses or Jesus, whether it's Krishna or Buddha, whether it's the hugging Saint Amma or Guru Mai or Mother Teresa, it's very clear that their life was about a way of being, that they taught it, they modeled it, that what the motivating force of their life was first and foremost a way of being. And if you really think about it, if you think about all the, what I would call spiritual qualities or these aspects of our being, such as love, compassion, patience, forgiveness, faith, courage, all of these things require a quality of being and a certain way of being for us to show up. And so that's what we're talking about today, which is week 6 of a 7-week series. This fall, most of you probably know, we are embarking on a journey to explore the ideas that are based on this book from Dr. Brené Brown. This book was just released mid-September, so hot off the press, we decided to take it on. And if you're not familiar with Brené, it sounds like Renee, but it's B as in boy, B-R-E-N-E. If you Google her name, Dr. Brené Brown, she's a teacher at a university in Texas, professor. She's a social scientist. And a few years ago, she did a TED Talk on courage and vulnerability that went viral. It's one of the most watched TED Talks in the world. And so she's written a number of books, and this latest one is The Quest for True Belonging and the Courage to Stand Alone. It's about braving the wilderness. And so today she offers 4 practices. She calls them wilderness practices. And by wilderness, what she's meaning is what I call to be the bridge. For me, when she's saying brave the wilderness or be the wilderness, it's, those times when your heart's beating and it's up to you to speak the truth. It's up to you to say something, to do something, to be the voice of compassion, to stand up for what is right. And sometimes we have to stand alone. I call it being the bridge. She calls it braving the wilderness. Whatever you call it, I'm sure you recognize it. But it's when you're called to show up, to speak up, to stand up, to be the light of the world, to be your highest expression of truth. And so she offers 4 practices for doing this. A couple of weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago, we looked at the first one, which says, people are hard to hate close up, move in. The second week, she says, speak truth to BS, be civil. Last week, Reverend Laura beautifully talked about the third one, which is hold hands with strangers. In all of these, it seems like a paradox. Hold hands with strangers. Well, to me, it's not a paradox. We do that every Sunday. And so, but there's a paradoxical thing that you'll find in each of these 4, but true spirituality is about embracing and becoming the paradox. And so the 4th one today is about a practice of what she calls strong back, soft front, wild heart. Isn't that beautiful? Strong back, soft front, wild heart. Now to me, I think that this one, she really hits the nail on the head, so to speak, because this for me encompasses what it really means to have a way of being as the impetus of your life, rather than being reactionary, rather than being moved by whatever comes up, that we are truly engaged in bringing to life a certain way of being. And I think if you really go deep enough in this, strong back, soft front, wild heart, you will find that it is this sort of recipe, if you will, for how to do this. Dr. Brown writes in the book, she says when she first heard this by the Zen priest, Buddhist teacher, PhD, Roshi Joan Halifax, they were both in New York at the Omega Institute. And she heard Dr. Halifax use the term strong back, soft front. And it really spoke to her. And she writes in Braving the Wilderness, if we're going to make true belonging meaning to be who we are in spirit and in truth, to be the light of the world, if we're going to make true belonging a daily practice in our lives, we're going to need a strong back and a soft front. We'll need both courage and vulnerability as we abandon the certainty and safety of our ideological bunkers and head off into the wilderness. She says, true belonging doesn't require you to change who you are. It does require you to be who you are. To be who you are. To be the light of the world. To be the salt of the earth. So Pope Francis back in 2013 said it this way. He said, wake up the world. Be witnesses of a different way of doing things, of acting, of living. We should be men and women who are able to wake up the world. To wake up ourselves and to wake up the world requires a strong back, a soft front, and a wild heart. That's what we're going to look at today. So what do the scriptures say about this? Would you give me the first slide? In 2 Timothy, it says, God did not give us a spirit of fear and timidness, but rather a spirit of courage and love and wisdom. A few years ago, I did a series on the Wizard of Oz. Kelly's from the Emerald City, so she could tell you about that. But, if you remember the characters in the Wizard of Oz, they were all about courage and love and wisdom. That's this balance, this part of what we need. And that's what it is to live with a strong back, a soft front, and a wild heart. I like the way the next prophet says it. Christopher Robin says to Winnie the Pooh, promise me you'll always remember you're braver than you believe, you're stronger than you seem, and you're smarter than you think. I like that one. And then E.E. Cummings said, it takes courage to grow up and become who you really are. It takes courage to grow up and become who you really are. And so this fourth practice it's a way to conclude that humans need both vulnerability, and we'll talk more about that, and courage, as well as an authentic sense of self and an immutable spirit. And so for a way of being, life is always asking us to show up. To show up. Every day we show up. How many of you heard when you were a child, now act nice? Or like my parents said, you better act right. You know what that meant, you better act right. And then as I got older and got into those little rebellious years, my daddy would say, you better act like you got some sense. You hear that one? Or I'd say, I don't care, and they'd say, you better act like you care. You've heard those things, you better act like. And so we don't even realize that we're enculturated to act. We grow up acting. We try on different things. My youngest nephew, Asher, who's now in college, but in my mind, every year when I go Christmas shopping for him, I have to stop myself as I walk down the toy aisle and think, wait a minute, they're not that little anymore. But when he was just 4 or 5 years old, he was in kindergarten. And, you know, with little boys particular, when they have that baby hair, and his mom and dad had let it grow until he had like these ringlets and curly hair. And then the weekend came when this little 4-year-old boy got his hair. He wanted it buzzed off, almost like his dad. So he went from these curly little baby-looking ringlets to spiked hair. All weekend, we'd see him, was like, whoa, you look like a big little boy. You look so tough. And he went around all weekend, rah, rah, because he looks different. So my sister-in-law goes to pick him up from daycare on Monday, and the teacher said, did anything happen to Asher over the weekend? And she said, well, he got a haircut. She said, I noticed, but he's been acting terrible all day long. He's been acting like, rah, everywhere he goes. And with kids, that's how we grow up. We try this on, we try that on, that we act. But it doesn't necessarily stop there. I love the story about Queen Elizabeth. Queen Elizabeth, when she was, Princess Elizabeth Princess Elizabeth, it was not certain that she would be the heir of the throne. And her father, King George, died early. He was only in his 50s, died unexpectedly, and she was only 24 years old. And she and her husband were in Africa, and they were flying back to Britain. And when they flew back, they were met by the Prime Minister, Winston Churchill. Can you imagine arriving at the airport, and there's Winston Churchill, who told her, we have decided that you will be the new queen. And so at 24 years old, this young princess learns that she's to become the queen. And of course, that would cause one to have some self-doubts, don't you think? And so she went to her grandmother, Queen Mary, and she said, Grandmother, I'm nervous. I don't know if I can do this. And she said, honey, you were born to do this. She said, yeah, but how will I know when I'm supposed to act like the queen? And how will I know when I'm supposed to just act like ordinary Elizabeth? Isn't that a great question? And in her grandmother's wisdom, she said, the situation at hand will call forth what's needed from you. She said, but most importantly, I hope you will come to understand that Queen Elizabeth and ordinary Elizabeth are one and the same. And that no matter where you go and who you are always both ordinary Elizabeth and Queen Elizabeth. You know, you are the light of the world. You are the image and likeness of God. You're it. Would you turn to someone and say, you're it? That's the good news, and that's the scary news. You're it. You're the light of the world. You're it. We're it. And we're our ordinary selves. And so through life, we ask ourselves, well, how am I supposed to act in this situation? Am I going to act right? Am I going to do this? And a lot of times we find ourselves acting out our fears, acting out our anger, acting out our frustrations. We find ourselves acting out these things because that's what we're enculturated, we're conditioned to do. It's okay. But what's supposed to happen as eventually we begin to realize that there's more to us than meet the eye. And rather than responding and acting this way or acting that way, that I'm actually here to actualize a higher way of being. That I'm here to actualize a state of being. I'm here to bring something forth. And that whatever I am facing, I turn within and I say, what's mine to do? What's being called forth from me? What does this mean? What is mine to do? I call it your soul force toolbox. You know, we like to have those old toolboxes where when something happens, we can say, well, it's your fault, or it's their fault, or if those people would just stop doing that, or that's the matter with me, or we can just rage out and go out on our anger. You got that toolbox? Yeah, we got that toolbox, but to have a soul force toolbox is to engage life in a different way, is to say, I'm it. The presence of God, the light of God, the salt of the earth, that's what I am. And so what is being called forth from me? What do I need to do? How am I being asked to show up right here and right now? And so what does it mean then to show up with a strong back, a soft front, and a wild heart? Well, a strong back, I think to me that one's pretty easy to understand. You know, we say things like, you need to get a backbone, or you need to find a spine. We use that saying because we realize in the physical body, how many of you have ever had a bad back problem? When your back goes down, you go down. And so to have a strong back means that you're supported. To me, to have a strong back is to have a strong knowing, to really realize who we are and where true power and true strength comes from. According to the Zen therapist Andrew Bain, he says strong back refers to our groundedness, our calmness in the face of turmoil, our boundaries, our core identity, our wisdom. It's how we hold our place in the world. It's the oak tree part of us in the hurricane. It's the captain at our helm, keeping course despite the metaphorical weather in our lives. Melanie Beatty in the book Codependent No More says, don't be blown about by everyone. Be strong. A strong back keeps our strongest knowing in the world. To have a strong back is to be supported by the truth of who you are. But you know, it seems counterintuitive to have a strong back. You would then think, okay, so now I need an armored front. Or at least I need a strong back, strong front, right? Because that's typically the stance, is one of protection and defending ourselves. And so what is this about a soft front? You know, in the gospel, the people there were grappling in the time of Jesus, and before they were grappling with these same questions. The Jewish community in particular were oppressed again and again by different other countries. And at the time of St. Paul's writing, it was the Roman Empire. And so in the book of Ephesians, there's this scripture that says that it's time that we cast away darkness or cast away ignorance, and we need to armor ourselves with light. We need to put on the armor of light, it says, or the armor of God. And then they go through and they use the imagery of the Roman Empire, because the Romans are what people there would have seen in their armor. And the scripture says that you need to put on a belt of truth. You know, the belts, they were the big belts, and they came down and protected. These big belts, they held the whole thing together. And it says, put on the belt of truth. To armor yourself with truth. Now, can you understand how people who were being oppressed by soldiers were saying, help us fight? And then they say, put on a belt of truth, and put on a breastplate of righteousness. Let your feet be clothed with shoes of peace. Put on a helmet. The helmet was the last piece of protective gear that they put on. And the helmets were very showy. If you look at some of the Roman helmets, they had these ornate symbols. They often had lots of feathers. And what they were told is you put on a helmet of salvation. The salvation was your spiritual signature. The way you protect yourself is with your spiritual identity. And the sword, what sword do you need? Spirit, a sword of spirit. And then the last thing, number 7 says, and pray. Like if all else fails, and pray. Do all those things and pray. That this is how they were saying, clothe yourself. This is what it means to have a soft front. Again, Andrew Bain writes, so what of the soft front? Doesn't it undo all the work of our strong back? Not at all. The soft front is how we move toward others in a spirit of compassion and open-heartedness. It's how we really hear what others are saying. It's how we learn to forgive. It's how we let things in. It's how we're touched. It's how we're moved. The scriptures often say about Jesus, and he was moved by compassion. Do you realize the power of that? He had to have a soft front. It had to get to him. Just like Reverend Andy said, I forgot the one line you said, but to live at the edge of your tears or something, it was beautiful. That's a soft front. Soft front is our kindness, our humanity, our humanness, our vulnerability. Dr. Brené Brown said when she first started speaking about vulnerability, she would often have sign language interpreters, and she would have to ask them, what is the sign for vulnerability? And they would always do this. Weak at the knees, right? And she'd say, there's another one. Do you know what it is? And they would think a minute. They'd say, oh yeah, it's this. To allow your heart to be seen. It's like the word intimacy. Into me see. You see, it's to remain it's to keep our sensitivity. I think we're in desperate need as a world right now to be sensitive, and that hurts. It really hurts to watch the news. Some people say, you mean you watch the news? Absolutely, it's my prayer list. You watch the news? Yeah, I want to know what's going on in the world. But I don't want to become wounded by the wound. You see, I want it to move me, though. I think that some of the greatest things we could do at times when these catastrophes happen is, what if we all came together and sat and cried? Can you imagine how healing that would be? Because when a soft front means I'm going to let it touch me, I'm going to feel it. But my strong back is that perfect balance. I'm not going to be swept away. I'm going to be able to be present to it without being carried away by it. I'm going to be moved by it so I can respond to it and make a difference. That's what it means to have a soft front. And then the third one is a wild heart. Who doesn't love a wild heart? I mean, a wild heart. In Unity, we hear the word wild and we go, yeah, count me in. Wild heart. I want a wild heart. What is a wild heart? Brené says, a wild heart fights against fitting in, and a wild heart grieves betrayal. The mark of a wild heart is living out the paradox of love in our lives. It's the ability to be tough and tender, excited and scared, brave and afraid, all in the same moment. It's showing up in our vulnerability. Remember, vulnerability is not weakness. Vulnerability is the willingness to show up without knowing exactly how it's going to end. It's the willingness to put your whole self in, to live your truth, to be touched, to be moved. And there's an incredible, powerful strength that comes about when we do that. That's why Jesus was described as both the lion and the lamb. You see, it's the two faces of courage, or it's sort of a courage and what appears to be vulnerability. They're both courage. The lion knows how to roar and protect and really get out there. But the lamb knows how to surrender, knows how to listen, knows how to get up and say, I'll try again tomorrow. Both of those are equally important. It's our wild heart that knows how to live that paradox, because the intellect doesn't. She says, we can't give people what we don't have. We can't fight for what's not in our hearts. A wild heart. So often, rather than living from a wild heart, our heart is heavy. We live with a weary heart. Or we act on our worry. Or we act on our why me. We're acting out these things rather than actualizing the power. So how do we do this? How do we live this strong back, soft front, wild heart? I believe the key to this soul force toolbox, so to speak, is always asking the question, what is mine to do? What is mine to do? What is mine to actualize and bring forth in this moment? Now, you may not know right in that instant, so just be civil, do the best you can, breathe through it, but keep asking, what's mine to do? What's mine to do? And the answer will come if you'll get ready to show the last video, the man. Just hold 1 second, but if you'll prepare. Charles Fillmore, the co-founder of Unity, at 94 years old, sat down and penned, "I fairly sizzle with zeal and enthusiasm and spring forth to do the mighty things that ought to be done by me today." I fairly sizzle with zeal and enthusiasm and spring forth to do the mighty things that ought to be done by me today. If we could take it one day at a time, that's a wild heart. I want to share with you, Richard, if you will prepare after this video, I want to show you a very short video about a man named Sir Nicholas George Winton. This man lived to be 106 years old. He just recently made his ascension in 2015. But he's a British humanitarian who, at the brink of the Second World War, when he began to see what was happening to the Jews, he had a strong back and a soft front and a wild heart. Because he was realizing these people are just like me. Somebody has to do something in this insanity. And so one by one, he began to risk his life to help children get from Czechoslovakia to Britain so that he can save these kids. Watch this video 50 years after the fact.
All the letters. But back here is the list of all the children. This is Vera Diamant, now Vera Gissing. We did find her name on his list. Vera Gissing is with us here tonight. Hello, Vera. And I should tell you that you are actually sitting next to Nicholas Winton. Hello.
And it was just so wonderful, so terribly, terribly touching.
Is there anyone in our audience tonight who owes their life to Nicholas Winton? If so, could you stand up, please?
$669 people. He never knew how many. He never told anybody for 50 years. He thought, why wouldn't anybody do that? An ordinary man, just like you, just like me. I think our world needs strong back, soft front, wild heart. And so when we find ourselves acting out these things, fear, our frustration, our worn out beliefs, stop and take that breath and say, what's mine to do? If I strong back, soft front, wild heart, what's mine to do? And I think we're going to begin to see amazing things. Amazing, amazing, you will do amazing things. Amazing, amazing. You will do amazing things. I invite you to close your eyes. Sometimes we think we need to do amazing things that are of a scale and a magnitude that is just dynamic, special. But do you realize the word special often stands in your way? For special sometimes stands before you in the step right where you are, the step that is yours to take. But because it may not seem special, because you may not feel special, sometimes we dismiss what is right before us. And yet, what if, whoever we are, wherever we are, the step that is right before us, what if we would stand in that place as it were holy ground? What if we would stand in that situation as it were a holy opportunity? And what if we would realize that we are born with a strong back and a soft front and a wild heart? And if we would but ask, what is mine to do? What is mine to do? Let me bring forth the light that I am. Amazing, amazing, we will do amazing things. Amazing, amazing, we will do amazing things. These amazing things are wrapped in amazing grace that flow from amazing hearts that are filled with amazing compassion. These amazing things will be the recognition that every face is the face of God, that every opportunity is a holy opportunity. And if not now, when? And if not who? If not us, who? So I invite you to just shake off any part of you. Let it go. That's still waiting for something. If you're not fully showing up now, what are you waiting for? If you don't believe you're the light of the world now, what's holding you back? And so just use your imagination and shake it off. And feel the strength of your back, which is the strength of your spirit. Feel the softness of your front, which is the recognition, the oneness, being present to life. Feel the wildness of your heart that will not let you settle. And realize that it doesn't matter how it looks. If it comes from this place, it is an amazing thing. Amazing, amazing, you will do amazing things. Amazing, amazing, you will do amazing things. So I invite you to wiggle your fingers and your toes and open your eyes and to stand up and to feel the strength of your strong back. To feel that soft front that can be fully present, that can show up, and that wild heart. And then unleash that voice. Here we go. Amazing, amazing, we will do amazing things. Yes, we will. Amazing, amazing, we will do amazing things. All right, this time, sing it with all you got. Amazing, amazing, we will do amazing things. Oh, yes, we will. Amazing, amazing. everybody. Amazing, amazing, we will do amazing things. Oh, yes, we will. Amazing.